Tonight, the case of the cross at the Supreme Court, the new ruling that's being hailed a victory for religious freedom, and the First Amendment. Plus, the president warns Iran has made a big mistake, the latest move causing growing concerns of possible military action in the Middle East. And the story of a young Christian kidnapped by militants in Nigeria and her mom's faith-filled mission to secure her daughter's freedom. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The president presenting the world with a cliffhanger on how he'll handle Iran. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. You'll find out how the U.S. will respond. That was the president's message today after the downing of an American drone.
The Iranian regime claims the move came after the U.S. violated its airspace. CBN News national security correspondent Eric Phillips joins us now with more on the escalating tension in the Middle East. Eric?
John and Jenna, the president is calling Iran's downing of a U.S. drone a new wrinkle and a big mistake as the war of words between the U.S. and Iran turns into a military escalation.
They made a very big mistake.
President Trump's somewhat cryptic response to Iran shooting down an unarmed U.S. drone, leaving a plume of smoke over the Gulf of Oman Thursday in this DoD video. Iranian officials say the drone, similar to this one, was hovering in their airspace when they used surface-to-air missiles to shoot it down. But during a Pentagon briefing, the head of the U.S. Air Force Central Command categorically denied that.
This was an unprovoked attack on a U.S. surveillance asset that had not violated Iranian airspace at any time during its mission. This attack is an attempt to disrupt our ability to monitor the area following recent threats to international shipping and the free flow of commerce. Iranian reports that this aircraft was shot down over Iran are categorically false.
U.S. military officials say the drone was over the Strait of Hormuz, an international airspace. The drone attack follows a string of incidents over the last couple of months, including 6 commercial ships that were attacked in the region. Iran suspected in all of them. Word that Iranian proxies were loading missiles onto boats within range of U.S. naval assets and other threats, all in response to U.S.-led sanctions against Iran after the U.S. pulled out of their Iran nuclear deal. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are split on what the next move should be.
The only way Iran changes its behavior is if they believe America will put options on the table that would create pain for the regime.
But let us get the facts as to how we got to this place. I don't want to make any characterizations about it, but I will say that we started to lose credibility on the subject when we walked away from the Iran nuclear agreement.
I wouldn't respond to the attack on the drone. I think we should just continue doing what we're doing.
If we do nothing, it just encourages Iran further.
The president believes the attack could have been the result of human error.
Somebody who was loose and stupid.
Here's what I believe about Donald Trump. He's a deal maker. He's trying to avoid conflict. But this is truly a defining moment for him.
The president's remarks downplaying the drone attack came on the heels of a briefing with his national security advisor, Secretary of State and Acting Secretary of Defense, who is set to step down amid the rising tensions with Iran on Monday. He'll leave the helm of the Pentagon without a confirmed Secretary of Defense for the longest time since the late 1940s. John and Jenna.
All right, Eric Phillips, thank you very much. Well, to the Supreme Court tonight, where it was decided today the Bladensburg Peace Cross can stay. The Supreme Court ruling by an overwhelming majority that a memorial cross not far from the nation's capital can remain on public land.
The High Court's decision hailed a victory by religious liberty advocates. CBN's Abigail Robertson has the latest on the ruling and the reaction.
The Supreme Court issued a big win for religious liberty, ruling 7-2 that the Bladensburg Memorial can stand. A 40-foot cross honoring 49 men from the area lost in World War I.
The Supreme Court has sided with reality and sensibility.
The legal showdown started when the American Humanist Association challenged that the cross, sitting on public land, violated the separation of church and state.
When I heard they wanted to take it down, it struck at my heart. It was terrible.
The memorial is in the shape of a cross to mark most graves of the war's fallen across Europe.
There's going to be a presumptive constitutionality for these religious symbols and monuments and memorials and practices across our country. That's a sea change.
Kelly Shackelford, chief counsel for the First Liberty Institute, says the legal precedent in the case of the cross was flawed.
They said that everything's changing. This 50-year-old precedent, this Lemon case, where separation of church and state and all these concepts that are not in the words of the Constitution were brought up, and that led to a lot of hostility by the government to religion. They said, and look, in these cases, Lemon is not going to be applied anymore.
At stake in the Peace Cross ruling was this dire scenario.
If this memorial is able to be destroyed, that means that bulldozer is going to turn from Bladensburg and roll across the river over to Arlington National Cemetery, where it'll start knocking down the Argonne Cross, the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice, and may even make its way down to Teddy and Bobby Kennedy's graves, which themselves have grave markers in the shape of a cross.
Shackelford claims the Lemon v. Kurtzman case of 1971 has been used to attack nativity scenes, veterans memorials, menorahs, and Ten Commandments monuments.
So what's happening now is we're going back to the Constitution, which is favorable to religious freedom.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of two justices who dissented, argues when a cross is on public property, the government may be presumed to endorse its religious content.
The founders would be shocked by that idea. We are religious people with a religious heritage. There's a Moses holding the Ten Commandments in the Supreme Court.
First Liberty is also celebrating the High Court throwing out an Oregon court's ruling against their clients who refused to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. Reporting from the Supreme Court, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thanks, Abby. Well, on the campaign 2020 front, new polling finds President Trump and Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden are neck and neck in the crucial swing state of Florida, where President Trump traveled Tuesday to officially launch his re-election campaign. The former vice president is just narrowly ahead of the president with 47.3% of voter support. That compared to the president's 46.8%. Just under 6% of voters are undecided in the early polling. That could be a snapshot of what is to come in next year's general election.
And joining us now are Mark Lauder, Director of Strategic Communications with the Trump 2020 re-election campaign, and CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Mark, let's just start with you. So we just saw that poll essentially showing Trump and Biden tied. What does that signal to you?
Well, it signals it's way too early to be doing polling on a 2020 election, and we were still 17 months away. And I mean, if we'd have gone back to the polling in 2007, Hillary Clinton and Rudy Giuliani would have been the nominees. We know that didn't work out that way. Right. So I understand that we like to do it, but it really doesn't provide any information to anyone right now, except just kind of a running tab on where it's not very meaningful.
Okay. Yeah. 2016, we saw a lot of polls got it wrong. Mark, what are the metrics the campaign is using to really take the pulse of the American voters?
Well, right now, obviously, we can look at the excitement and enthusiasm for the president and his message. We saw it on display in Orlando before Tuesday, where 125,000 people signed up for tickets to Tuesday's night rally. I was out there on Monday, saw people lined up for 42 hours before the president spoke. So there's a lot of ways we can judge that. We also talk about the way we can capture information and talk specific issues with people. We can track their passion for these issues, where it is driving them. That is the most informative thing we can do right now, because we're still a year away from even having an opponent, let alone being matched up against that person. So right now it's where's the president delivering on his promise to the voters? And then we'll worry about who we have as an opponent once they get one.
David, turning overseas to Iran, it's not just a foreign diplomacy issue. What are the political implications for not just President Trump, but also candidate Trump?
Well, all eyes will definitely be on the president, obviously, number one, from a national security perspective, but there are political considerations. There always are political considerations. And look, this plays to his strength, which is his strength. I mean, he's a law and order guy. And look, I also think that we're in a situation now that do you really want to mess with President Trump? I mean, not only has he obviously delivered on a lot of promises, but beyond that, and I say this in the nicest way possible, but he's a bit of a wild card. In other words, he may do it, he may not, depending on what the issue is. I don't think Iran wants to mess at all with President Trump, especially because of this situation, because it was over international waters, which gives Trump a little bit more of the moral standing to do something here.
David, quick follow-up. It's been nonstop with this president and the news. Do you think undecided voters, and particularly the crucial bloc of independents, are tired of all this?
Well, I think there's a block of them that are probably dealing with somewhat of Trump fatigue. I mean, I don't think there's any question that the undecideds and the independents, wrestle with that. But at the same time, this president can go ahead and show that he has promise after promise that he has delivered on. And so I think, no pun intended, but he hopes that trumps what happens with the fatigue aspect as it relates to independents and undecideds. Thank you so much. I worked on that all day, by the way.
Mark, Democrats are just, ramping up their calls for impeachment. How do you see this playing out if they do go down that route? What does this mean for the Democratic Party?
I really hate to think about this in terms of politics because this should rise above politics. I mean, the Constitution set out the parameters for this to be rare and exceptional circumstances. It's only been invoked actually twice in our nation's history. And yet you have Democrats who are trying to placate a radical socialist base that are filled with Trump derangement syndrome. Nancy Pelosi is barely hanging on to control of that caucus, and they're trying to drag her down that path. If they do, it'll be something that, the American people will have to judge. But I hate to think of it in terms of politics, even though I'm sure there could be arguments made that it would be an advantage to the president. I don't think we should think that way.
David, this could get out of hand for the Democrats.
Yeah, it can, and they have to be careful with those 40 Republican or districts that flipped from Republican to Democrat. That's the key.
All right, David, Mark, thank you so much.
You bet.
Canada's Prime Minister at the White House today. The latest on his meeting with President Trump when we come back. Trade headlining a meeting between President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today.
Their Oval Office sit-down happening as a new trade deal between the two countries and Mexico comes closer to becoming reality. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy has the details.
President Trump calls this the largest trade deal ever made, but it's up to the House to put it to a vote. Trump says he thinks Speaker Nancy Pelosi will do the right thing.
One day after Mexico ratified it,
Mexico is thrilled. You saw the vote.
President Trump is pressing Canada's Prime Minister to follow suit.
It just brings us into a position where we're not competing with each other. We're competing against the world.
The United States-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, or USMCA, replaces the 25-year-old North American Free Trade Agreement. Earlier this year, President Trump removed U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada and Mexico, clearing a roadblock to push through a North American trade deal.
We were very pleased with the lifting of the tariffs on steel and aluminum.
The deal just got the green light from Mexican lawmakers Wednesday with a vote of 114 to 4.
We need to get this done. We need to reunify our economies, reduce trade barriers so that we can compete.
It's reported Canada is now waiting for the trade deal to move through the U.S. Congress before taking it up in the House of Commons.
Canada needs a new NAFTA more than we do, really. I mean, we all benefit, but it's really important for Canada. So much of Canada's trade is obviously with their neighbor to the south.
What's the holdup on Capitol Hill?
What is the holdup on Capitol Hill? That's a great question. There's almost no doubt that there would be plenty of votes in the Senate to ratify this. The problem is in the House of Representatives, and as you know, that is now ruled by Nancy Pelosi.
I really believe that Nancy Pelosi and the House will approve it. I think the Senate will approve it rapidly. It's going to be very bipartisan. It's great for the farmers, manufacturers.
How soon will we see the economic impact?
I think almost immediately.
Okay.
I think it would just have be like taking a champagne bottle and shaking it up and taking the cork off. I think it would just be, very relieving to the business community and a lot of our exports.
There is now a sense of urgency to get this trade deal passed, with President Trump set to meet with Chinese President Xi next week at the G20 in Japan. Mexico's president says one reason it got overwhelming support in their country is it gives confidence to domestic and even international investors. That's the latest at the White House. Ben Kennedy, CBN News.
Still ahead on Faith Nation, why one woman traveled from Nigeria to the United States to seek help for the sake of her daughter. Well, China, Russia, and Iran and North Korea are among some of the worst places in the world for human trafficking. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo released a new State Department report on the issue today, saying the U.S. is sending the strongest message possible that trafficking will not be tolerated.
Human trafficking is a stain as well on all of humanity. We detest it because it flagrantly violates the unalienable rights that belong to every human being. Every person, everywhere, is inherently vested with a profound, inherent, equal dignity. America was founded on a promise to defend those rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice. But too often we've fallen short, and we cannot fall short on this challenge.
And right now, 25 million people are being trafficked around the world, including here in America.
Right. Family Research Council President Tony Perkins is the new chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. His first act, taking up the case of 16-year-old Leah Sharibu, a young Nigerian Christian girl declared a slave for life by Muslim militants. Leah's mom traveled to Washington this week on a mission to secure her freedom.
Rebecca Sharibu has little to smile about, grieving a loss no parent should bear.
My name is Rebecca. I come here to plead the government of U.S. to please help me for her release.
Her daughter, Leah, was kidnapped at school along with 109 other girls, taken by Boko Haram, a deadly Nigerian terror group with ties to ISIS. The Nigerian government negotiated the release of each girl except for Leah. Her captors wouldn't let her go unless she renounced her Christian faith. At just 14, Leah refused.
She chose faith over freedom when it would have been so easy to cave.
For 6 months, Leah's mom had no idea whether she was dead or alive until August 2018, when Boko Haram released this photo and a recording of Leah pleading for her life.
So from February to August, you had no information?
No information.
What was it like when you saw the video with your daughter wearing the hijab and on the mat?
Immediately I saw it, I just started crying and weeping.
And it's not just Rebecca's. Tears flow throughout this West African nation. About 2,000 Nigerians died last year in a dispute portrayed by the media as a clash between farmers and herdsmen.
We're here to let the world know what's happening, because they keep this narrative of herder-farmer conflict. It's not that way at all.
Instead, Alhiri Mugaji and Mercy Mesamari call it a religious campaign to oppress Christians.
A bill was just passed by the National House of Assembly saying that preachers are going to be regulated and their license renewed every year. So we believe Kaduna State is a testing ground for what plans they have in Nigeria as a whole.
They're speaking out with great risk to their own lives because Fulani Muslims now run the country.
Someone has to say what is really happening. And if God says it's you, then you can't run away from the responsibility of being the one to talk.
This really is a jihad that is raging in Nigeria and that we are ramping up to a genocide.
Now 16, Leah's brave stand is encouraging others.
As a Christian, I'm not afraid. I want to stand for my faith on behalf of my people.
Even pushing her own mother, who's never once left her village, to travel thousands of miles to the United States, desperately seeking help.
Donald Trump, I have come to plead with your government, to plead with President Donald Trump. My son's name is Donald. So, Donald Trump, it's a son. I need him to help me have my daughter released.
And Leah Sharibu also told me she wanted to thank the whole world and especially Christians for standing with her family and praying for them. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Well, earlier today, we reported on the War Memorial Cross the Supreme Court will let stand in Maryland. But here in the nation's capital, a different war memorial is drawing special attention.
The Vietnam Veteran Memorial. Each day, people are leaving a special memento. Gabe LaMonica visited to show us what's been left behind.
Close to 60,000 U.S. service members were killed in the nearly 2-decade-long Vietnam War. In the nearly 4 decades since this memorial was built, some 230,000 items have been left here in their memory.
We are here in An Khê, South Vietnam. I am in Bravo Troop, 1st of the 9th Cavalry. I really can't think all that much to tell you, except I'm doing fine.
Before his death in a helicopter crash, First Lieutenant Robert Prine had only been in Vietnam for 20 days.
Also would appreciate a letter.
Prine carried these audio tapes with him before sending them home.
Keep care of yourself.
For years, visitors have carried things and left them at this wall.
They say as much about us as it says about the wall.
The mementos are picked up each night by National Park Rangers like Cawthor Elmy.
It runs the gamut from culturally significant items and specific to the war to things coming from children like Dear Soldier. And it's just a piece of paper with their name saying thank you for your service.
From prosthetic legs to personal letters, from the Purple Heart to religious medals and a family Bible. The items are kept here in a government warehouse under the care of Janet Folkerts. Some of the things they let go of are heavy, like this Harley-Davidson motorcycle. The Hero bike was left by a group of veterans from Wisconsin.
They say it's not to be ridden on until all 37 men are brought home.
Other things carry memories, like the kimono one soldier sent home 2 days before his death.
Sent to Liz saying it will match her aqua eyes.
She kept it for 40 years before letting it go. Not everything makes the cut.
We had a lot of really random, unknown items.
But Ranger Elmy says the things they leave behind provide a connection to this hallowed ground.
There's this umbilical cord between our response to these people's sacrifice.
The names of every American service member killed or missing in the Vietnam War are etched into this wall. The objects people leave here tell their stories. Gabe LaMonica, CBN News, Washington.
It's really neat to see what they do with those personal artifacts.
Yeah, a motorcycle.
Who would have thunk it?
All sorts of stuff. Yeah, you'd never know.
Yeah. Well, that is a wrap for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.